welcome to week 2 of Fostered Live Read. Once again, I am author Shalina Michelle Tate, and I am coming to you with another week of reading from my book called Fostered, which is now Amazon.com. And I am wanting to share with you this week chapters 3 and 4. So, just to recap, and let me show you here on my screen for those who was not able to um, participate last week. I do have a video that is posted about week 1. You can go back and listen to that content as your schedules allow. It's basically my introduction and a little snippet about the foster care system and the reading of chapters 1 and 2 of Fostered. So last week we covered the introduction, my daddy's little girl scenario, and then my introduction to foster care. And today, week 2, I will be covering I Could Have Died and meeting number 1. And then, of course, next week will be hands on kind of person and standing alone. And then the final week, week 4, I will be covering what was I thinking and the unexpected milestone. So, for this week, once again, my name is Shalina Tate, or author Shalina Michelle Tate. I am doing like my impromptu, I guess you want to call it, audiobook read of my book called Fostered. I am gearing up to present to you some new content. I'm also in the process of updating Fostered and to pair it with some content that you can be able to do creatively with your reading with Fostered. So I'm excited about that. But let's dive right in. Once again, this is week 2 of Fostered, and I am going to dive right in. If you're following along with me, thank you for your patience. You could grab your copy via Kindle, which is in the post on the page of how to get there, and read along. All right, let's dive in. I Could Have Died. This is chapter 3 of the book Fostered. And once again, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to put them in the comment section. And after today's reading, I'm going to go over those questions, those comments, those concerns. And I really appreciate any participation, especially if you have questions about anything read or any questions concerning foster care. I would love to do my best in answering what I can. All right, so let's dive in. This is chapter 3. I Could Have Died of the book Fostered, which is now Amazon.com. Let's jump into it. All right, I Could Have Died, chapter 3. So, finally getting accustomed to school, my medical problem resurfaced at the most inappropriate time. So, back in chapter 1, I kind of went over like the medical issues I was having and how that emerged in a foster care placement I was going in, and now we're about to get some answers to what's going on. So, let's continue. My class was heading back to our classroom after story time when that awful rectal pain hit me without warning. Once again, I will also be recounting on ordeals and scenarios, and just to give a fair heads up warning, some stuff is graphic, so please bear patience with me. Once again, I'm just recounting on childhood scenarios, but hopefully the learning experiences and lessons behind each of these things will help somebody else, right? All right, let's continue. All right, so I sat down on a wooden chair to prevent the stool from coming out and waited for it to go away, the pain. I cried as my stool tried to force its way out. I couldn't tell the teacher why I was shaking and crying. On the other hand, I had no choice. After the report from the school to Miss Angus and DSS, finally I was admitted to the hospital. Miss Angus, for those of you who don't know, is the foster care placement that I'm currently in, experiencing these situations and scenarios. Well, the current foster care placement as far as the reading goes, right? All right. So you can imagine, based off my previous ordeals, I had a fear of hospitals. Eventually, the hospital doctors gave the condition of what I was suffering with a name. The hereditary issue that came from my mother was called Hirschsprung disease. So Hirschsprung disease is page 38. A congenital disability in which nerve cells are missing at the end of, in my case, a child's bowels. Normally, the bowel contains many nerve cells along with its length that control how the bowel works. When the bowel is missing nerve cells, it does not work well. This damage causes blockages in the bowel because the stool does not move through the bowel normally. In a child with this disease, stool moves through the bowel until it reaches the part lacking nerve cells. At that point, the stool moves slowly or even stops. I recall getting a children's book during my hospital stay. The book was a helpful attempt to explain my disease in a way that I could understand. So, while my teeth were an uncontrolled external issue, my colon disease added to those complications that needed remedying. Unlike my teeth, my Hirschsprung disease was an internal, unseen issue eventually corrected. And yes, I had three corrective colon surgeries that was allowed to really help me fully function even to today. So staying in the hospital brought a lot of discomfort. Nurses stuck needles in me, introducing an intravenous tube or IV. They held me down for those uncomfortable enemas I talked about in chapter 1 and 2, and watched me scream during gastric or NG tube insertions. I received fluids a lot of times in place of eating regular food. The IV, however, gave me the nourishment I lacked at home. I didn't have, or should I say, I didn't like having visitors who would eat in my face when I couldn't have any. Having the nose tubes was another reason I couldn't eat food at times. The tube was there to suck out and flush out the toxins I accumulated during my disease. Once I asked the nurse why the green stuff flowed through the tube, the nurse replied, "It's helping to clean your bowels." In between surgeries, I walked around the hospital to regain my strength. I was able to visit children's room to play games. I was excited to play the just released, and I'm telling my age here. I was excited to play the just released Nintendo 64. And I don't remember much about the surgery except disliking the smell of gas mask and waking up sore. The gas mask always smelled weird, even though the nurses said it smelled like berries. When I first came out of surgery, I couldn't stay awake. I was cold and very sore. Back in my room, I barely moved due to the pain in the tubes. During my stay in the hospital, my schoolwork was delivered to me by caseworkers or students from my school that came with their parents to visit me. Before I was admitted, there was a girl who had picked on me and my clothes during a school field trip. As an apology, the girl brought me clothes as a gift. Though I thought it was a good gesture, and the clothes were equally as old as the ones I already had and not age appropriate. So back in chapter 1 and 2, I was expressing how in my current foster home, I was myself and the other foster child was given or really provided clothes that were from the local thrift shop. So a lot of those clothes were really not age appropriate as far as they were too old for my age. They didn't fit. And while the foster parent at the time would constantly get her and her granddaughter's clothes from the mall and hair and nails done on a weekly basis. But once again, I'm just recounting the experiences, the life lessons, and the progression from that. All right. So at the time, I thought the clothes were a nice gesture with the green stirrup pants, a large knit sweater with pink and green matching flowers. Writing now, which was a couple years ago, I could easily think it was pretty. Now, I understood that much of the teasing and taunts I received back then were due to the kids' lack of knowledge. People fear what they don't understand without, and then also the pressure to fit in. So, as I mentioned, I had three consecutive surgeries. The first surgery was to clean out all the gunk. The second surgery was a test of how the colostomy, which was a surgical operation in which a piece of my colon was diverted to an artificial opening in the abdomen wall to bypass a damaged part of the colon. So, in other words, I had to wear like the newer replacement piece of the colon outside of my stomach wall in order to see how it would work. So, and when I was even And so when I was about 11 or so, the final surgery helped place the functioning colon inside my body. So as an adult, I hear a lot of people going through this, but mainly the elderly. I don't know too many cases of children going through this, but I'm pretty sure there's some out there. If you know of anybody that has gone through this that's not a senior citizen, please comment on that. I would like to kind of dive into that a little bit more. All right. Throughout my surgeries, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of biological family members. The family member came to me um, as a group during my final surgery. It felt more like a family reunion. My parents had lost their parental rights, so I didn't know how the family managed to visit me during my hospital stay. I'm pondering this now as I write about it, or then. I don't think DSS gave permission, and if they did, I believe it was supervised. I don't remember. So, regardless, I was excited to see many of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Yes, like you, I'm wondering why any of them didn't step up and take care of me or take me in. However, I'm finally at a place where I have peace with this question. I believe they and their own families, they have a lot going on and their own families to care for, and that God doesn't make mistakes. I'm now an intercessor and growing intercessor for my family and others as I continue to grow in acknowledging who God is and how He has played a major part of my life. All right. The day of my family visit, my doctor shared some vital information with me that I have never forgotten. But before I get into that, let me share a little more about the Angus placement. So I continued attending church with Miss Angus. I played outside with other children my age. The church grounds were large, so we could run around outside playing hide and seek or freeze tag. Aside from children's church and choir rehearsal, I didn't talk much with the other kids. I mean, I did become connected with two little boys, and eventually I visited them. So, during certain points in my stay with Miss Angus' family, Lily, that's the other foster child, and myself were often placed in respite homes. And the respite homes, they offered a way for primary caregivers to take a break from caring for their loved ones, primarily seniors, or in my case at that time, a foster child. I'm at home, so you may hear some background noise. Thank you for your patience. So occasionally, Lily and I would go to respite homes when Miss Bertha Angus wanted a break. When Miss Bertha and Patrice went on vacation, we were stuck in pre selected homes where other providers provided for our care. So, like therapeutic placement, and like I said before, therapeutic placement, respite care, or foster home, they have credentials to care for children or youth who have any kind of medical need that they need addressed. They have those credentials. So, like a therapeutic placement, a provider is selected by their credentials for care. Lily will often stay in the home of a lady who lived in a mansion, while I stayed with a lady out in the country. I really liked Miss Nadine because her home was quiet and she was very nice. The main road to her house was across from a milk plant. I knew to look for the giant milk carton on the roof each time I visit. Miss Nadine Clinton lived with her daughter in a home pushed back among plenty of tall trees and other woody and viney plants. She looked to be in her early 40s with brown skin, a petite frame, and loving personality. Her daughter, Claudine, was slender with a lighter complexion. Claudine looked to be in her early 20s and had shoulder length black hair with a petite frame as well, and silver framed glasses. Both were very nice, and during visits, I often wished I could live with them all the time. On one of my visits, Patrice had given me $2 in change before going on vacation. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't know how to make change. I also didn't realize that the $2 I found at the Clinton home weren't mine. When confronted, I said that I thought it was mine, but I didn't say that Patrice had given it to me. Of course, this was regarded as stealing, even though I expressed not knowing it wasn't my money. Sadly, I never returned to this placement, but a new respite home was certainly on the horizon. So, remember the two little boys I mentioned I met at church? Well, their names was Latron and Endell. Playing outside, we often had fun together, running around and squishing water bugs that came out of the drain near the back parking lot. Don't ask me why I could do that then, but as an adult now, I don't know, I just knock them outside. I don't know. The boys were very nice brothers. They were light skinned with brown curly hair, brown eyes, and quote unquote biracial. At the time, I didn't know really what biracial meant. I noticed they had the silver caps in their mouth, just like me. Page 42. After a while, Miss Angus allowed me to visit them at their home. Their house became a new respite home for me, and I learned Mrs. Angus's cousin also cared for foster children too. My visits to this home, however, didn't start until the completion of all my surgeries. So during my final surgery, the doctor disclosed, quote, "I feel you have a right to know. I'm operating on your two brothers as well." He also said that if I hadn't come in for my surgeries when I did, quote, "I probably could have died." Yikes. As you can imagine, this has stuck with me. And yes, I said the same doctor was operating on my brothers. They had the same bowel problems, and we were in surgery at the same time at the same hospital. Meeting my brothers at the hospital, I was reintroduced to two familiar faces, Latron and Endell. I was confused but happy because I played with them all of that time and often felt connected to them at church. Mrs. Angus never revealed that I was related to them. Neither did she mention how I had an aunt that attended our church. The only reason I found out about my aunt was that she had approached me. So Aunt Shirley was a short, dark-skinned woman with big curly hair. She often wore a long beige coat that hid her dresses. And yes, again, like you, I wondered what kept her or other family members who had visited me in the hospital from taking me in. I don't know. And this question would follow me for years. The only other thing I remembered about Aunt Shirley is after that first meeting, she kept her distance. I learned that my mom and dad's parental rights had been terminated by the court, and I didn't see her long after she spoke with me, and I believe someone at DSS confronted her about talking to me. So, to recap, I learned I was attending the same church with an aunt and two brothers. I also learned that Mrs. Angus had a cousin who kept those brothers. Finally, I discovered that my doctor was performing the same surgery on my brothers and and me at the same time. With the doctor's disclosure about my brothers, I wanted to thank him, but wasn't able to locate him. And I don't know if he was fired or resigned because I was a ward of the court. I don't know if he had the legal right to share the information about my brothers with me. So after the big reveal, oh, before I get into that, does anybody have any related experiences? Have you found or a lost relative you didn't know you have, maybe like as an adult, or maybe you did play with them as children and you didn't know you were related, and then later on you found out you were related? If so, please comment in the comment section about that circumstance. I would love to hear about that and talk about that more, right? All right, let's continue. So after the big reveal, I started visiting Miss Tessa Plankton's home. It was not until that time I discovered that she was related to Mrs. Angus and cousins. And yes, I said earlier cousins, and she also kept my sibling relations private. Now, I understand my privacy being protected as a ward of the court, yet I'm humbled that God touched the heart of my doctor. I mean, I feel I would never have known the truth otherwise. It became apparent that Miss Angus and Miss Plankton knew the truth all along. They were visibly upset after I found out. To this day, I still question how Miss Plankton was able to take in my brothers while she knew her cousin would get me. Now, being carefree with my brothers at church was one thing, but visiting their house was another. On the first ride to the Plankton home, Mrs. Angus whispered over to Patrice that I wasn't supposed to know about my brothers. So basically, in chapters 1 and 2, I would basically reflect on how Miss Angus will always kind of gossip about people, her surroundings, especially church members. And once again, this is not to be nosy little kid. Like I know people say, oh, you need to stay in a child's place. I just always happen to be in the atmosphere, and she will always do it around me. And she also often assumed that I just wasn't smart enough to know anything, as I shared in video one, right? Moving on. So being carefree with my brothers at church was one thing, but visiting their house was another. Okay, I read this part, but I'm gonna reread it. On the first ride to the Plankton home, Mrs. Angus whispered to Patrice that I wasn't supposed to know about my brothers. I later learned Mrs. Angus was a member of the DSS Foster Care Review Board. Yes, I said board. So what's wrong, you ask? Well, I think that these cousins are double teaming, or were double teaming the foster care system, not out of the genuine concern, but for personal gain. I know that sounds bad, right? But unfortunately, I've seen and heard of that over the years, and not in a positive way. So inside Miss Plankton's home, I had to basically have a front row seat of how my brothers were actually being treated. I noticed a lot of things about my brothers and what they went through. So on one visit, Latron was clicking the keys on the computer that was in the living room. The computer was turned off, so I didn't think it caused any harm. In an outrage, Mrs. Plankton came in and backslapped Latron in the mouth. During the slap, she yelled, "Didn't I tell you not to touch the key computer?" I was in shock from her reaction to what my brother did. I stood dumbfounded as blood came pouring from his mouth. I felt helpless as he went into the kitchen, covering his bloody mouth and crying. I followed him to the kitchen, attempting to console him in an embrace. However, I was terrified as Miss Plankton rushed past us to the back bedroom. When she returned to the kitchen, she lashed out and proceeded to beat Latron with a belt buckle. Yes, I said buckle, and this was the first time I had noticed the scars on his body. I wasn't paying attention before, but they became more noticeable with each lash. So having clothes on at church and their playful nature hid their secrets well. During a home visit from my new caseworker, I relayed to her what I had witnessed inside the Plankton home. I expressed that I wanted my brothers to be removed from the home, but I was told, quote, that they needed to report the abuse. I said I wanted to get them when I grew older, but I was told again that would be their decision. So I was much older than my brothers. Um, so during this time, I had years ahead of me before adulthood. And in the conversation with Miss Tessa, they said that because she was on the DSS board, they couldn't do anything. What? So you mean to tell me that if someone serves on DSS board and has foster kids, that they could get away with any kind of abuse? And of course, that was my thinking. Like, what do you mean? So before leaving the system, I asked several new social workers about my brothers. The answer would always be the same, not having their case or not knowing anything. I eventually stopped inquiring. Uncle Larson later revealed that a family had adopted them under a different name. So this is an update. So update to this writing. Um, at the time, my uncle did reveal that they were adopted under a different name, but what I did not know is that Miss Tessa was their adoptive mother. Okay, so Miss Tessa was their adoptive mother, and that was their adopted home, and and she was on the DSS review board. I, it just makes it worse, right? But that was years ago. So let's continue. So before this conversation, the years started passing in the Angus's home. The routine would continue as home, church, and school. And I didn't fit in at middle school. And the bullying by other kids towards me continued. My clothes still played a part, while dental issues assisted as father or really teething, teasing for the teasing. So basically, it just fueled the fire. In middle school, I took a sex education class, orchestra, and I'm about to go in some graphic stuff, but not too graphic, right? Started my cycle and continued learning what it meant not to fit in. Everyone needed permission to take sex education. I learned the most about my body in this class. I had no prior knowledge. This lack of knowledge contributed to the low self esteem issues I faced well into adulthood. So during sex education, I started my cycle with Miss Angus, which she supposed was self inflicted. Yes, I said self inflicted, and I got blamed for a lot of strange things that happened at her house. I continued to mess up my clothes while Patrice told me how to clean up and dispose of my stuff. Before this, I can recall talking about or watching girls talk about their periods in a news report. This is all at school. So at school, there was girls that were talking about their periods. They were excited, and there was a news report at that time that of a woman who was a rape victim. And so before sex education class at the middle school, um, there was that topic of the rape victim, and I just kept hearing how this lady was on trial for cutting off her attackers' private parts. The girls I overheard talking said she did it, accusing the men of raping her. I recall asking one of them, "What did rape mean?" Now, I, once again, very naive and new to a lot of things, right? Her reaction to my ignorance made me feel downhearted, but then she explained, "You must understand, I couldn't really ask questions like this to Miss Angus. She already made me feel different. Earlier I mentioned in chapters 1 and 2 that um, she assumed I wasn't smart enough to comprehend gossip. I was always categorized because of my remedial class placement, and Mrs. Angus had little faith in me, and I was blamed for my uncontrolled circumstances." So let me share some examples. And these are weird examples, but this is what happened. So, attending middle school, I had a chance to participate in orchestra. This was a fun activity until Mrs. Angus removed me one evening while winding the violin strings. One of the strings accidentally popped. Mrs. Bertha thought I purposely broke the string. Other occasions were her accusation of me throwing, quote, I'm not making this up, her accusations of me throwing a toothpaste mixture on her car. And that was actually bird poop. Okay. Not obtaining good grades and improved grades because she felt that the teachers just gave it to me out of pity. And yeah, sorry. She really thought that her relatives, namely Patrice, which was her granddaughter I spoke about, chapter 1 2, um, were the only ones smart enough to succeed. So finally, the plastic toy incident was a terrible misunderstanding. During one car ride, I noticed a toy hamburger bun that was stuck inside the cup holder next to me. I attempted to remove it, unaware I was being watched in the rearview mirror. She stopped the car, came around to my side, opened the door, and began beating my hand with a yellow fly swatter she often carried. My hand was sore, shaking and almost bloody. I cried in humiliation and pain, unable to defend what I was actually doing. Like I said earlier, Lily and I was just there to add extra income to the household. Let me put a pin in here. Okay, so over the years growing up, I've had the opportunity to, briefly speak to aspiring social workers, mentors, counselors, and those thinking about going into foster care. And I have to continuously advocate this truth. If you feel like you want to get foster children just to add to your taxes or your household income, I would advise against you even considering it. Why? Because I know we all have hard times and stuff we go through, but getting foster children shouldn't be for that purpose. Meaning, if you don't feel like you can genuinely help the child right where they are, and each person's, testimony is different, but the children know. They know. And even at that age, I was in that home from age 6 to 12. I knew. I knew the difference between genuine love and the appearance of love when it's out in the public, and then monetary love. I knew the difference. So what I'm saying in all of this is if your heart is not genuinely in the right place to, really care for these children, then don't waste your time. And I'm not saying that to be cruel, but it's a life. It's not a commodity. Okay. I'm on a spill, didn't I? All right, let's continue. All right, so at school, I often watched the cheerleaders, always complimenting the one I knew from class. I'd express how she favored one of my favorite sitcom characters. At the time, there was a show called Step by Step. And there's this other show called Boy Meets World. She looked like the character of Topanga. I'm not sure if anybody knows that show and who I'm talking about, but she looked like her. Okay. I was longing to fit in, be accepted by my peers. I also felt that no guy would ever really like me. However, I was surprised by the advance one guy attempted one day. On one commute to sex education of all places, many guys kept telling me how Jaquel Peters really liked me. Because of my low self esteem, I rejected his advances. This happened on the day those same guys told me I had red spots on my flowered dress. Here comes the introduction to Pad Placement 101, which followed that very evening with Patrice. Self consciousness and peer teasing continued to settle in. So I must express this. I know this, kind of sounds bad, but once again, this happened. So in that placement, Patrice, despite the fact that she would follow Miss Angus up on a lot of things, she kind of stepped in a lot where Miss Angus, the foster mother, should have stepped in. Like when, and once again, I will recall, graphic situations, and I try not to go too deep. But when I started that cycle, she stepped in and showed me how to. Whereas Miss Angus, she didn't really have the faith in me. She always assumed everything I did was self-inflicted, or because of my circumstance and situation, I can only do so much. So yeah, I felt like Patrice stepped in those vital times where Miss Angus should have been the the mother figure. Let's say it that way. All right, continuing on. Page 47. After the surgeries, I had to heal, endure colostomy bags, and long tubes used for flushing out the colostomy. And once again, I mentioned earlier what a colostomy was. The colostomy was a new part of the colon that hung outside my stomach. So getting my outside colon drained by the long tubes proved equally uncomfortable. I'd wear colostomy bags to catch the drained stool that would come out of me from the colostomy. I wore this until my final surgery, which placed the functioning colon inside my body. My stitched up stomach scars are a constant reminder, even to this day. Um, this is something I wish no one ever has to endure. And so, like I said earlier, colostomies and all that, you usually hear about the elderly, people in the elderly community enduring this as their bodies get older, and depending on each person's situation, some people, it may catch up to them depending on their lifestyle or nutrition or care that they may give. For me, I was a youth going through this, so hats off to all the elderly people who've ever had to go through that. I had to endure it as a kid, so it's not fun. It's not fun, and I imagine that medical surgeries and stuff pertaining to that circumstance has come a long way since I was a youth to deal with that. I imagine so. At least I hope so. At least to make it less uncomfortable. Okay. All right. So I began healing in my life at age 12, finally shifted. So, mind you, now I'm recapping from home I was in from age 6 to age 12. I don't know why I left the Angus home after 6 years, but I was glad for a change. So, at the time of this writing, I imagine it was because Mrs. Angus was paid to assist in my therapeutic need. That's that therapeutic foster care home I was mentioning earlier, a therapeutic foster care home. They basically deal with individuals, youth, and whatnot who have any kind of medical, they're licensed, they have those credentials to help care for people who have any kind of medical need. It could be from minor to severe. All right. So, um, I imagine that it was because Miss Angus was paid to assist in my therapeutic need. So having my final surgery probably sealed any further care in her home. Whatever the case, I often pondered on the time I had with Lily and Patrice. And before leaving this placement, I had to learn many things. Why I felt like an outsider in my place as a foster child, why I needed to observe people and other surroundings, and finally, how my low self esteem often placed me in survival mode. Despite this, I know, page 48, my fonder memories helped shape much of my testimony. These included being part of a musical program at church and school. During my first major performance, I was asked if I was supposed to wear shorts and or pants, and not really sure or paying attention. I said shorts, and I was the only kid who stood out on stage wearing dark blue shorts with red stars. You know, as funny as that was, that along with movie night later piqued my interest into acting and theater. I will say that out of all the kids, I was often picked to lead a solo performance. This surprised me. It was definitely an interesting career choice, especially for someone who lacked self confidence. Participating on stage and later in plays made me feel alive. I also enjoyed mingling with other children during summer camps. And sometimes, after coming home from camp, I was able to get a minor laugh or two out of Miss Angus. I would tell her how a girl told me my weave had fallen out. Mrs. Angus laughed was the only time I felt she laughed with me, not at me. Meaning, I come home and mimicked how the girl said my braid fell out while swimming. Sadly, this was the only example of an authentic moment I felt I had with Miss Angus. I'm in awe, as a at the time as a young adult, of how I frequented a number of places I connected with as a child. I discovered I had associated with people and places with proximity of where I grew up. Examples include discovering I was living with another biological relative that wasn't until my final placement. A brother in my final home was living across the street from the Angus home camp that I went to, where I was talking about the girl and the weave falling out. Christy Lance, my primary school I talked about in chapters 1 and 2, later served as a place for my auditions and theatrical production assistance that I did. And finally, a high school teacher was the woman from my respite care placement that I spoke about a little earlier, Mrs. Hanks, which, in other words, it all kind of came back full circle. The list continued to grow, much to my amazement, and the greatest moments, as you can imagine, were my corrective surgeries, being reunited with some biological family, and finding out about my brothers. For my doctor to tell me I could have died and about my brothers is bittersweet. Bitter because I didn't know the severity of my disease. Sweet because I was reconnected with family. I later learned in a conversation with my biological mother that Miss Plainton had died. and I'm not sure if this information was accurate at that time. However, I did notice my mother's disapproval of Mrs. Plankton. In another conversation, my uncle disclosed how my brothers were adopted under different names. I don't know how accurate this information was either at that time. To this day, my uncle seems to know a lot about everything and everything going on. I don't know how or where he got his information, but I'll elaborate on him a little later. So later, as an adult, I ran into Mrs. Angus while I was attending a local community college. Noticing her in the hallway, I smiled and waved. She completely ignored me. I wasn't about to chase her down, so I just felt that she didn't want to be bothered. I ran into her again in the parking lot in front of the college. This time I approached her as a much older Patrice arrived to pick up her mother. So sadly, I really do have to laugh at this next part, this strange and brief reunion, as I call it. During my second encounter with Mrs. Bertha Angus, the first one was with Patrice, I approached the car to greet them. Instead of asking if I was doing well, Mrs. Angus balled up her mouth. She made it seem as if I completely ignored her in the hallway, saying, quote, "I tried to speak to you in the hallway. You act like you don't know me." She continued. I thought, well, I never did anything. This is what she's saying. She continued, I thought I never did anything wrong to her. Um, I wanted to laugh. Instead, I asked Patrice how she was doing. So sadly, I was quickly reminded of the influence Mrs. Bertha always had over Patrice. After telling her about the class I was taking, she asked, "So, do you have any kids yet?" She was shocked when I responded, quote, "No, do you?" After a few awkward seconds of silence, I basically told them to take care and I departed. The answer to Patrice's question is still no, and I'm in my late 30s now. 30s, early 30s at this writing. That's not to take anything away from anyone who does. I know that according to statistics, it's naturally expected, that, that would become the primary reason for my fight through the system. So, what I mean by statistics is, according to statistics, is something I always kind of fight against, but according to statistics, it's naturally assumed that people who come from the foster, adoption, orphan, or underserved communities are much more likely to end up on the streets, end up pregnant, end up on drugs, incarcerated, or whatever the case is, prostitution, and unfortunately, a lot of kids who do choose to leave, emancipate themselves out, they'll go back to their circumstances of family and just connections that may not really be healthy for them. But unfortunately, because of environmental effects, they can very well fall into those statistics. But that's not everyone's situation, which is what I'm trying to say. And even if that was somebody's situation, it doesn't mean that they don't still have purpose, which is something I always try to advocate for anyway. All right, continuing on. All right. So, like I said, that doesn't take anything away from someone that does. And I know that according to statistics, it's naturally expected. And statistics would become, like I said, my primary reason for fighting those statistics and those assumptions through the system. Growing up, I was often told what I had become and what I was not. I was never told until now what I could become. So I'm going to put a pin in that. If you are a current foster parent, advocate, a teacher, a mentor, is so vital. Even if your child is not a foster, adoption, orphan, or come from an underserved community, or whoever you mentor or spend your time with, it's so vital that you speak life into them and not speak to them or at them based off their circumstance. Why? Because I can attest that that lasts with each individual. Like, people can remember stuff from childhood. I feel people can remember stuff from childhood quicker, and it'll take more effort to kind of remember the good. I could be wrong in that, but I feel like the traumatic stuff kind of lasts and sticks out more, even in adulthood. So Once again, if you are a aspiring foster parent or current mentor, teacher, advocate, whatever your role is, please do the opposite of what statistics say. Speak life into these lives. Tell them what they can be. Tell them that they have greatness and purpose. That goes longer and further than what their situation tries to tell them that they can only obtain. Okay, let's continue. So later, I ran into one of the members from the church. Miss Gatley was a memorable face from the adult choir. So unfortunately, she was also one of the people who often got caught up with Mrs. Angus's gossip. Miss Gatley was a short, brown-skinned woman with a stocky frame, short layered hair, and a few bottom missing teeth. I asked how she was, and I inquired if she still saw Mrs. Bertha at church. She told me that Mrs. Bertha had left the church a while back to attend the chaplain's church. The chaplain was the primary pastor or chaplain I saw while I was in her home on base. And once again, I was saying in chapters 1 and 2 how um, we attended church on post because Mr. Angus, he has a military background. Okay. All right. So they basically left that church that I remember to follow him. All right. I found out later that Mr. Angus had passed, and I was sad. You know, Mrs. Angus was nothing like Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus was a very quiet man with a meek spirit. The only thing I knew about him was that he was ex-military, which was why he attended the church, or why we attended church and shopped on the military post. I did get a little upset. This is silly, but I did get a little upset when I walked in on him feeding one of my pizza slices to the dog. Okay, so I had a personal pan pizza I won from school. During that time, you earned points, for reading and completing tasks. And coming to eat after my bath, I saw him eating and feeding one of my slices to the dog. As upset as I was, I couldn't stay mad at him. I know that's silly. I know that's so silly. So feel free to comment right now if you can remember a time, a person. You don't have to say their names, but if you can recall from your childhood a person that was especially like really nice to you. I mean, genuinely nice to you, out of the norm. Meaning that you may have been in an environment where the environment may not have always been nice or welcoming, but there was a person in that environment or in passing that kind of made you feel welcomed or that they really cared. I would love to hear your responses about that. Feel free to comment. All right, as we continued our conversation, I made certain that I didn't say anything against Miss Bertha to Miss Gatley. Instead, I asked a lot of questions. Miss Gatley was responsible for the acolytes. Back in chapter 1 and 2, I was saying at the church they had acolytes, which basically they would light the candles of the church candles, the altar, and that was the thing they did there. Okay. And giving out choir robes for church service. So reminiscing, I asked her why I couldn't do certain activities when I first arrived at the church as a child. And I laughed when she said, quote, Miss Bertha was afraid I, quote, burn the church down. My objective lesson in writing these memoirs, and once again, the others are coming up, they're in the works now, was and is still remains to forgive the people who I felt had hurt me or who I had hurt, and to forgive myself in the process. And this is something I mentioned to aspiring writers and authors. If you're writing or want to write your book and you have memories that you want to recall from, the best thing you can do is to take the time to heal concerning those situations, because if you don't, and that's another thing, like a lot of times writing, you don't have to have it done in a certain time frame. I know people say, oh, I've had quite a few people say, Shalina, when's your sequels coming out? Well, they are coming out. It's just the vision of them have changed since I initially wanted to put them out there. So what am I saying? Like, if you're writing from a place, especially if it's a memoir or a place of a personal place that's a true story, take time to heal, because if you write about the stuff and the situations and the people, that stuff is going to come out in your writing, right? Because the goal here and that I've come to is to really heal. That's one. And to also like forgive the people. I know you can't do that on your own. You really can't. You need help, and it's not always therapeutic, like go to a therapist. For me, it was God. I'm gonna just be transparent, and him getting me to a place of forgiving the people, myself, in the situations, and even those I hurt knowingly or unknowingly. So we have to get there before we can progress with stuff like this writing. And okay, I could go on. All right, let's continue. So like I said, um the lesson from leaving the Angus home and now well through my adulthood has become clear. I've come to a place of realization that all my ordeals were different seasons in my life that I was experiencing. Psalms 31:15 says, "My times are in thy hand. Deliver me from the hand of mine enemies and from them that persecute me." Now, even though this is a short passage of the Bible, this King James Version, like the extension to that is you need help getting to forgiveness, and it's not to get back at anybody. It's like a healing process, and to understand that a lot of times we wrestle not against people. I could go on. We wrestle not against people. Okay, I'll leave that there. I might have to go expound on that in book 3. Okay. Now I can acknowledge the following. I was with Miss Holston so my dad could find stability. I stayed with Miss May. These are from my first 2 readings, chapters 1 and 2. I stayed with Miss May to know the true love of a mother. I was placed with Miss Dolores to alleviate my retinal pain. I lived with Mrs. Angus to correct my medical condition and reunite with family. Still, this wasn't the end of the journey or the seasonal changes. The next placements would provide new lessons, new struggles, and new triumphs to endure. It's not easy going through the trials and temptations, even with perseverance. As I graduated to a new temporary placement, I was faced with new obstacles. And as a budding teenager, I had to adjust to new surroundings. If you recognize what I'm talking about, don't beat yourself up. A constant lesson I'm learning, page 52, is that this race, life, isn't given to the swift, but those who can endure to the end. Today, I now say beyond the end, because you could get to the end of the whatever you think is a race and then give up, right? The race of life is a daily effort, a daily intentional effort. Okay, so each day we breathe, we have new grace and mercy to get it right. It doesn't mean that we'll never go through challenges. It just means we must focus on the prize. And as a youth in this brief placement, I didn't have any focus at first, but as I grew into my own person, I made school my priority and life shifted. All right, so that is the end of chapter 3 of the reading. I'm about to go into chapter 4. Once again, this is a 2-chapter read, week 2. And once again, if you've missed chapters 1 and 2 reading, don't fret. I got the replay video on this page, on the Foster My Stories page. You can also catch it on the author Shalina Michelle Tate page, and also on the Foster My Story author I'm saying Facebook is there, but also on YouTube. Okay. 3 different places. All right, so let's jump into it. Once again, feel free to ask any questions. If you have any questions about foster care or anything I'm reading about, don't hesitate. You may have some questions or want to know some more about some of these ordeals. You can. It's okay. You can ask. Don't be afraid. So, like I said, we have thus far covered the introduction, Daddy's Little Girl, introduction to foster care, I Could Have Died, and now we're about to dive into meeting number 1. Okay, and super excited. Next week we're going to touch on hands-on kind of person and standing alone. And in the final week, once again, I'm doing these readings every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't worry if you miss it, because I know people got things they do, especially on the weekends. You can go back and watch this content, and if you do, it'll be posted on the pages for you to watch, listen to. And feel free to share. Feel free to share with other people you may know that have gone through the foster, adoption, orphan, and underserved communities. Hopefully, this brings them encouragement in some form or fashion, right? And hopefully, stir them to also tell their stories. All right, let's dive in. Chapter 4, meeting number 1. So, Miss Claria Hanks, which I kind of spoke about a little earlier, Miss Claria Hanks was a temporary placement I wish would have been permanent. I moved in with the understanding that I'd be with her until my next home was assigned. You could say Miss Hanks was my respite placement, leading to a placement transition. So, what happens is a lot of times is when a foster child is in between foster homes, a lot of times they may be placed in a respite home until their next foster home is ready. And that means, like, you know, everything, and of course everything, licensing and checking homes and all those things have dramatically improved over the years. Certain credentialing and just different things had to be in place. It's much more so now than I feel when I was growing up. Okay. All right. She was a teacher at the local high school, and one older girl named Felicity, um, and somewhat like Patrice, stayed in the home with her. So earlier I mentioned I was being placed in homes that had both a mother and a father figure. And once again, this just shows that the times have changed. When I was coming up in foster care, they kind of strived for both a mother father figure, and now you don't have to have two people in the home for someone to become a foster parent. You could be solo, and which is good as well, because not everyone can have kids. I kind of spoke on that in chapter 1, I believe, how I was with a lady, and she was considered a respite placement, temporary placement, and I wanted to stay with her so bad. It's like all the respite homes were the best homes. I'm not trying to sound funny, but in my experience, and I don't know what nobody else's experience, but it seemed to me like all my respite homes was like the best homes to be in. I don't know, but the first respite home I was in, the lady, she mentioned she couldn't have children, so I'm glad that I was able to stay with her the time I was able to. Sweet lady. But anyway, but now things have changed since then. It continues to change since then, and I'm a continued advocate for the best well-being of the foster children and placement. And yeah, okay, let's continue. I can talk, right? All right. So, like I said, yeah, earlier I mentioned I was being placed in homes that have both mother and father figure. Well, this wasn't a major requirement in the respite homes, and of all the respite homes I had been placed in, none ever met the two-parent requirement. So, looking to be in her early or late 40s to early 50s, and once again, if you're following along on your Kindle book, I'm on page 53, meeting number 1. And if you would like to follow me next week or in week 4, feel free to grab a Kindle copy, $5.99. Or if you reach out to me directly, I'll give you a discount. All right. All right. Looking to be in her late 40s to early 50s, Miss Hanks' brown skin and short stature remind me of Miss Dolores from chapter 1 too, except for the short curly hair she sported with some flair. As with the other foster mothers, Miss Hank wore glasses, yet unlike them, she encouraged my school studies. And once again, to me, everybody's situation is different. To me, the respite care tended to have the best homes. I don't know why. Okay, maybe because it wasn't permanent. I don't know. All right. As a dynamic teacher, and aside from the time I spent with Miss May, this was where I felt truly free. Felicity was around 18 or so, while I pushed on 13 ish. She was about 5'10 or 5'11, dark skinned, and very mature for her age, of course. When I arrived, I quickly latched onto her as a potential big sister. I learned a lot from her about life, the neighborhood, and how to care for myself and who to look out for. So before she left for the service, I'm embarrassed to say she caught me in a bad position. Okay. Once again, I will recall on situations and circumstances that's kind of graphic, but just to give you a heads up. But I try not to get into too deep. All right. Before I get into that, let me share how she supported me in my developing stage. Felicity helped me with styling my hair. She protected me from the dangers around the neighborhood as I was very, I'm gonna add another very there, very naive. I had just started to blossom, and she warned me about Alicia, the girl across the street, and the neighborhood boys who regularly visited her. Alicia was very popular, and her parents allowed her to roam about freely. After Felicity left, Miss Hanks encouraged me to know Alicia and become close with her because she was my age, close to my age. Alicia was a year younger than me or so and very carefree. She lived with her parents and they were very lenient. Alicia was brown skinned, slender, and wore neatly fitted braids. Her closet was full of clothes and shoes, and she encouraged me to try out a few of her outfits. Much like my situation with April, I had to learn not to get caught up. So even though I was a little older, Alicia had much more influence than I did. She always traveled with an entourage around the neighborhood. On one occasion, Alicia talked me into trying one of her trendy outfits. I wore the clothing only because Alicia and I thought it looked cute. I was nervous because it was a little outside of my comfort zone. Plus, I was more physically developed than Alicia. This was the first time I had worn tight fitting clothes, and it would be the first house party I attended as well. So on the way to the party, a man yelled at me, quote, "Hey, you could get raped wearing that." Yeah, I was embarrassed, but I felt a little safe because I was with Alicia and her group. Inside the party, I stayed glued to the corner while I watched preteens grind on each other to slow music. Suddenly, I understood what the man who yelled at me meant. I was pulled on the dance floor by a guy who I had seen grinding on another girl, and I refused to dance. I was nervous by what I had just witnessed and other activities going on around the house. I soon became aware of the guy from the party who took a girl upstairs to have sex with her. I only understood this because he came back telling everyone, quote, "She smelled like fish." Boys just okay. No filter. Other than the sex education class, this was the first sexual environment I had been in among my fellow peers. The party was short lived because the mother returned home unexpectedly. About 5 minutes after her return, it became apparent that the girl upstairs was the daughter. As you can imagine, the mother came in frantic, fussing and yelling for the girl to come downstairs. Alicia and I stepped outside. We were not aware that the friend didn't have permission to have the party, and we left amid the mother's unrelenting fussing and telling everyone to leave. Now, that part may be blurry. I'm saying that the mother didn't know, but maybe it was a party. Maybe it was a party that the mother knew about, and maybe the daughter got out of control, inviting everybody under the sun, and maybe only a few people were invited because the mother came back with groceries and food and stuff like that. I don't know. It wasn't a good situation. All right, I'm gonna leave that there. Who knows? All right. Aside from blossoming in this home, I learned how to deal with the reality of liking boys. When I stayed with Mrs. Angus, there was this popular guy I had a crush on, like many other girls. I was quickly disheartened when classmates made fun, insinuating how another girl and I liked him. The joke was that we both stood out for all the wrong reasons, and he expressed, quote, I, I don't like either one of them. Equally to my equally, my introduction to Valentine's Day at school was just as embarrassing. Every day I watched as other girls in the class got cards and candy while I always was left out empty handed. I hope schools have changed to become more inclusive of students who were left out, much like me. I mean, it become a harsh reminder of how my uncontrolled outward appearance often left me unappreciated. This new understanding continued to highlight a number of reasons I was self conscious. And in this home, I continued comparing myself to other girls. At school, I understood how I couldn't relate. And at home, I well, as I lacked the confidence of Felicity and Alicia, I was never taught much about boys. I mean, yes, we had sex education at school, but it's completely different when facing it in reality. So I'm gonna put a pin in here and say that that is so true. You know, a lot of times we could take sex education, or a parent, you know, guardian or a mentor can tell us about sex, but it's so different. It's so different when you are faced with it up front and you may either be alone or the pressure is like nobody really teaches on what to do in when you're facing that pressure right then and there. It's easy to say, oh, walk away, but that's not always the case, right? Okay, let me continue. I can especially imagine it's, oh, I just said this right. I can especially imagine it's also different for many youths who have come from broken homes, single parent homes, or like me. At the Angus home, I started my cycle at school and it was brought to my attention by a boy. The cycle was broken down in sex education for the reproduction process, but not the practical details of what to do when faced with one, or should I say temptation, right? The question that bothered me the most was what to do when faced with unfamiliar temptation. I'm talking about before coming to the acknowledgement of God and fleeing from the temptation. I noticed that at many churches, pastors, I'm going to just go ahead and say it, right? Okay. So I noticed that at many churches, pastors and ministers criticize many youth. Often they selectively, and I say this, often they would selectively forget how they mishandled temptation as a youth, and in some cases, what they may still be doing. I'm in, you know, as someone who's grown in ministry, I can now address this. So when dealing with our young people, we must talk to them, encouraging them about their growth, you know, not highlighting their faults. Now, at the time when I was introduced to temptation, I didn't know how to feel. You know, seeing how the kids acted at the party was uncomfortable. So I didn't want to be pulled into that. Before the infamous night at the house party, I found out that being alone with temptation was a whole other matter. And that's what I kind of touched on a little earlier. Malik, Malik was around my age, maybe a few years older. He was Miss Hank's nephew who lived in the neighborhood. When he came to visit her, I gawked at how cute he was. I never shared with Felicity or Miss Hanks anything about these feelings. When he first came to Miss Hanks' house, he only stayed briefly. Then he began visiting more and more, then noticing me. Ugh, I got lured in by his smile. As I look back, I believe I was just another challenge he was trying to tackle, meaning it's not like he, you know, really noticed me or talked to me or even wanted to date me. You know, Malik's complexion was smooth, caramel color. He was, you know, sort of slender for his age, maybe 15 or 16 at the time, and wore a low cut with waves. He was especially alluring because he had hazel eyes that I'm sure attracted a lot of other girls. Oh man. You just gotta learn, right? Okay. I don't know. You know, if I don't know if this played, you know, I don't know if he played sports or if he attended the high school with Miss Hanks. He would find me alone in the house, either in the front room or in the kitchen. You know, I made the mistake of hugging him when he asked. This was my first time doing this. I made the mistake of hugging him when he asked. It was a big mistake. Okay. Okay, I'm about to say something. What happened? And I don't know if anybody else experienced this. He obviously got this from somewhere. I looking back at this, he obviously I felt got this from somewhere. For him to just to naturally do this, looking back, is kind of disturbing. Okay, so he would find me alone in the house, either in the front room or kitchen. I made a mistake of hugging him when he asked. It was a big mistake. Graphic. Um, I was. It was a big mistake because he turned and purposely pinched my developing breast. This was extremely painful as the pinch followed with a twist, and it was as if he was out for blood. That just reading that sounds awful. It was awful. It was awful to experience it, and it was awful. And as I'm reading it now, I'm thinking like, you know, what kind of twisted, yeah, looking back, it's kind of disturbing, right? It is disturbing. I don't know if anybody has experienced that before or had somebody do weird behaviors to you or someone you know, but if you have and are not ashamed to talk about them, hit me up and we could talk about that. All right, let's continue. Um, from that day on, I kept my distance away from him, of course. Still, when he did see me, he would chase me around Mrs. Claria's car. Okay. I, I ran for a long time until I had to break away from the bathroom. I probably should have just did it right there. I don't care. But I didn't. I had to break away from running to the bathroom, and unfortunately, he caught me and twisted them again. I wasn't strong enough to stand up to him, and what made it even worse, as you know, was that I liked him. But definitely didn't like when he did that. So when I think about it, I believe he already knew how I felt about him without me saying a word. I mean, I guess he presumed he could treat me like the other girls he knew, or I don't know. For him to do that, that's on some other level. Okay, I wasn't sure of this then, but I was glad he stopped pinching me. But here it goes. On the other hand, he stopped the pinching but moved up to kissing me. This was another first. I never been kissed. And yes, that's the name of a movie. And that was my situation there. Never been kissed. Here we go. The day he caught me alone in the house, I found out how easy it was to get caught up in temptation. I believed I was pulled away from the boy at the party that night because the temptation was in front of others. Also, I didn't want to be treated like that, like I was fast or loose or easily based on what I was wearing that night. Along with Malik, I didn't know how to run from his kisses. I didn't know that watching television on the couch was the classic way to get the girl either. That's how it started. So Malik came to the house, and I believe Miss Hank had left to run an errand. However, Felicity was aware that Malik stopped by and had stepped away to let us watch TV. Let me put a pin in that. Well, I'm going to say the next part, and then I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Okay. I was caught off guard when he kissed me. I became paralyzed when he kissed my neck. It happened so fast, and the next thing I knew, he was attempting to pull my hand. Yeah, pull my hand. Graphic. He was attempting to pull my hand to his now exposed crotch. Unfortunately and luckily, Felicity walked in on him lying on top of me. Thankfully, I still had my clothes on. So getting chastised by Felicity was worse than the peanut butter incident. So back in chapter 1 or 2, I was basically saying how, I went to daycare and they had this peanut butter that was in a bucket that you could actually literally, get from the bucket, pull apart and eat. And then when I went to my foster placement, the peanut butter was there on the table and I stuck my finger in it because I love the peanut butter, I didn't ask, and I just didn't at the time know that wasn't good to do that like that, and I got kind of like hit for it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so like I said, that was the worst, getting chastised by Felicity, and that I felt was worse than the peanut butter incident. I was very embarrassed, and Felicity ranted and told Malik to leave. Felicity fussed at me, expressing her disappointment. I felt so low because this was my first dupe by a guy, and I really disappointed someone I admired. I don't know if Felicity told Miss Hanks what happened that day, but she never mentioned it to me. That was the last time I saw Malik for the remainder of the stay. Shortly after the incident with Malik, Felicity stuck around for about 2 more weeks before leaving for the military. So now, kind of like reading this, and pondering on this, I kind of got to ask, like, for Felicity to kind of allow him, because she's known him well before I came to the house. So, maybe she just wasn't thinking, or like for her to like allow him. That's another thing, for her to allow him to basically, like, because he's never done that before. That was the first time that's happened with me and him like that. And for her to allow him, to give him permission to like watch TV with me on the couch, I don't know why that wasn't suspicious to her. And maybe he showed a different side to her, like he showed a different side to Miss Hanks. And maybe I thought also he was like he was a nephew or whatnot, or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Anybody has any experiences like that? Maybe you trusted in a childhood friend or somebody you trusted, then they kind of flipped the script on you, and then you were kind of found out by somebody you looked up to. And if so, like, how did that make you feel? I would love to hear your experiences if you have any of them. No worries if not, but if you do, I would love to talk about them. Let's continue. So Felicity was right about Alicia being carefree and spoiled. I come to see that she was down to earth too. I understood that Alicia was carefree because her parents were. She was spoiled because she was the only child. And even with this, I don't know if Alicia was taught about the harsh realities of life, and that was during that time. Her many clothes and shoes may have come from her mother, while her driving life skill may have come from her father. I'm not sure. But while we roamed the neighborhood, I come to meet her friend, Clayton. He was a close friend of Alicia while writing now or then. I believe if Felicity had been around, she would have warned me about Clayton too. Clayton was the first quote unquote teddy bear I come to talk to. He was so nice and never pinched me the way that Malik had. Despite claiming I was dating Clayton, our kisses didn't go beyond seeing him in the neighborhood. However, it was fortunate our kisses, or should I say, however, it was fortunate our kissing meetings were conducted outside. I have to say, our puckered kisses were a lot weirder than the sparks I felt kissing Malik. Now that, now that that's really a, not that that's really a good thing, to compare from my age at that time. It was just how I felt about the puckered kisses with Clayton. My visits with Clayton and Alicia eventually died down as school rolled around. I started spending more time with Miss Hanks and concentrating on my schoolwork. I know moving forward from Clayton was the best for my interest at the time, and I eventually reunited with him at that same community college with Mrs. Angus. It's so weird. It's like I reunited with her at the community college, and also reunited with him at that same community college. That's another life unexpected thing, right? Of all places. So, yeah, our reunion confirmed the awkwardness of, I felt kissing him as a teenager. Seeing him at the college allowed us to catch up, and he requested my assistance on a theatrical play. My major was already theater, so I was glad to help with the play for his class project. That sound bad. It was funny that he requested I play his wife. I guided him in the rehearsals, not worrying about his classmates. What I learned was that melodrama surrounded him. Not only was the play to impress his friends, but to stamp the reality that he and them were all gay. Okay. I would love to hear some of your stories if y'all can relate dealing with that exposure, somebody and we really didn't go on a real date. It's not like we went out, but just that whole interaction with him, it just made it even weirder. Let's say it that way. Let's continue. Yeah, that just, yeah. So yes, I said gay, and this was confirmation for the awkwardness. I don't know how many females, like, this is a part I'm saying, I don't know how many females reading this can relate to this reality, aside from the discomfort Clayton decided to reveal to the friends how we used to date. That comment became yet another embarrassing reality. I don't, I would say, and maybe I'm wrong about this, if you've dated somebody and then later in life come to find out that he was gay, or that's what he chose to be, it may not be as bad as if you marry somebody and then come to find out that that's what they choose to be. I don't know, because I think honesty is the best up front, not later, regardless. Don't put people through. Okay, I go on. That's book 3. Let's continue. um, I now believe that he was struggling with that spirit when we dated. Now I'm about to go into this whole situation of that, and does not to bash anybody, does not to make fun of anybody. Once again, we are all individuals. We go through life and we all go on journeys. And as I grew my spiritual journey, I learned some things. But my encouragement is to encourage those who go through stuff like this to know you're not alone. And yes, we battle not against people, and that's book 3. All right, let's continue. All right. I now believe that he was struggling with that spirit when we dated. Often I have talked to individuals later in life struggling with the spirit. The story seemed to be the same, where the mom's boyfriend or a family member abused them. It would be the same spirit I deal with later in college. Also, this wasn't my own personal struggle but the struggle of my roommate I live with. And then remember April, that whole scenario back in chapter 1, 2. I believe that may have been, I hope that's what she didn't grow into. But that situation I expounded on in chapter 1, 2, I believe that was the starting of that. Okay. Go rewatch chapter 1, 2, read to find out what I'm talking about. Okay. All right. So after our quote unquote college reunion, I gave a message to Clayton and a former coworker. I expressed how God loved them but hated their lifestyle. I'm not to go into it, and it's not judging, and I know it sounds that way. Okay, let me continue. The words came from an inward nudge that kept intensifying. And it was more of a nudge to tell the truth in love and still love on them, and still, it wasn't to say, oh, your stuff is so bad. So I was going through my own stuff, especially by this time. And I was also expressing to them, hey, I'm not immune from anything I'm telling you. And this is still the same message today. It doesn't matter what struggles we all face. Everybody's struggle is different. God still wants us to come to a place in him of deliverance and healing, and he wants to change our lives for the better that's going to help us thrive in our purposes and what he has for us. Okay, let me continue. All right, so like I said, I wasn't saying it to be condescending or thought I was any better, because I definitely wasn't. I said it at the beginning of my spiritual walk. The nudge prompted me to express the truth because I was learning it. Now, I'm sure someone reading this may say, but you're supposed to be a Christian. Well, yeah, I am a Christian, but the word has gotten so twisted over time, especially in churches. People compromise just to get somebody to sit in their pew, but they don't tell them the truth. Still in love, because God doesn't hate anybody, but we go through real life and real stuff called sin. That's book 3. I'm getting ahead of myself. So yes, I am a Christian, but the word has gotten twisted over time. Becoming a believer doesn't mean we boast in self-righteousness, which none of us have selective memory, which a lot of us show in different churches, which is not right, and judge with unrighteousness. There is a way to judge in righteousness, but not judge to condemn somebody to hell. God's just wanting everybody to come to him and discover this truth. Okay. I'm at the bottom of page 60, going to 61. The righteousness is telling others about the truth of God, what God teaches us. It's a daily effort to do it in love, true love, and not to be a people pleaser, because a lot of times even that, which I struggled with for years, not now, but for years, could hinder, what God is wanting us to do for his, to help others. So up until this writing and beyond, these have been constant reminders in my journey. As you can imagine, the message wasn't received well by either individual. And looking back, I used to beat myself up for how I delivered the message. So, of course, like I said, I was in the beginning stages of my walk, and I reached out to both Clayton and Justin during a group text message because, of course, I knew both of them. And wasn't really thinking about how this might be perceived. I was excited to share the truth I was learning with others. Also, before giving the message, I felt a stirring inside to just tell them. And I know now that the Holy Spirit gave me that nudge, but it was a lesson in expressing the truth I'm learning to grow in. It was a harsh reminder of how no one acknowledges the change God has done in your life. And I've experienced this countless times. as I have grown over the years. This is so true what I'm about to say, but it's true. Um, so basically, this is true, especially for family, friends, and associates. However, I realize that they can't really appreciate the change without accepting the change for themselves. What am I saying? So, a lot of times when you are going through your spiritual journey, and once again, this is daily effort, and I've grown so much, and I got so much more growing to do. So, let me just express I have not arrived. I'm nothing but a messenger, and I had to learn a lot and go through a lot to just even get to the person that's reading this book to you right now. Let me express that. Um, and that, God can meet us right where we are. But during the time of this deliverance to these two people that I felt really close to, you know, um, or anyone, whether it's even if it's not that, it could be something else. What am I saying in all this? A lot of times when you're, wanting to help others, it's not always going to be perceived right. What you will always be remembered for is what you used to be, what you used to do. And they can't appreciate, that's what I'm saying. They can't accept or appreciate if they can't really accept the, change for themselves, you know? And this is a knowing that you have to come to individually. It's not forced. Let me say that. All right. I did a long spiel there, so let me continue. Meaning, and here's what I'm meaning to say, if they are still tied to things of the flesh and in this life, they can't discern spiritual growth. They only remember how you used to be or question your right to tell them anything. And this ex-coworker told me, quote, not to contact him again with that brainwashed propaganda, while Clayton was hurt that I put it in a group text message. And yes, looking back now, that was very immature to do it in a group message. So, of course, repeating this scenario to close ministry associates, I received peace. I was told I shouldn't feel bad for saying what I knew was right. And of course, I wasn't doing it. I was not, that wasn't my intent, let's say it that way, to hurt anybody. I was just so excited about the truth. I was pulling from the truth of God's love that He meets us right where we are. That's still my stirring today, is to like tell people that He can meet you right where you are. It does not matter, what you're going through, what you've been through, or where you feel you're going. He can meet you right where you are. You don't have to come to Him perfect. You don't have to, no one's ever perfect. And you don't have to have titles. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have a position. You don't have to have the best car, the best house. You don't have to have a dime to your name. He can meet you right where you are. And so repeating that scenario, I did get some kind of peace. I was told I shouldn't feel bad for saying what I knew was right. I was assured that even if I didn't really send that via a group text, it still might not have been received and rejected. So as much as my past was brought up in retaliation because of it, and of course, that's what happened. Like, I was expressing that and affirming that I'm not perfect. I still have issues. But of course, it was a matter of lashing out of, you used to do this, you did this, you did that. And let me express that when you're growing in your purpose, your journey, your walk, each person comes to that on their own. That very well may be the case. You may get rejected by family and friends and those closest to you. We have to remember in our blueprint, as I call it, the different, scenarios and the different ambassadors that went before us and what they faced. It's not going to be easy. It's not supposed to. But what I'm learning even more and more and more, that you have to find and allow God to give you the words in love to help who He wants you to help, or express what He wants you to express. Okay, let's continue. I could go on and on and on, right? So with Miss Hanks, I continued the middle school. I started with Miss Angus, or basically kind of completed that. I enjoyed the science project. So I basically did a science project out of brownies Miss Hank helped me create. I had the idea to make brownies after learning about the plant and animal cells. So brownies served as my animal cell, while chocolate chip cookie batter, well, it was a cake by then, assisted for my plant cell. It became easy to do my first class presentation. I used both items to present as students ate and cleaned both pans. That was a good thing, because if something was left, I would have questioned, like, what did I do wrong? All right. The reminder of my stay with Miss Hanks I enjoyed activities with other youth at her church. So unlike Mrs. Angus Church, Mrs. or Miss Hank's church was more inclusive of the youth. I'm a big advocate about that as well. If there's a ministry and, you know, if all I see is the youth on the tablets, everywhere I go and or back in the back room playing video games, I would question like who's helping to meet the youth right where they are. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there. That's book 3. All right. So basically, at Miss Hank's church, I felt more included with my peers, um, in comparison to, when I was at Miss Angus's church. All right. So preparation for the new home transition was bittersweet. I can only express good memories. Unlike many of my former stays in this home, I felt like I gained a real sister, a temporary mother, a fake boyfriend, and close friendships. Alicia was the first real friend I have, along with a girl named Melody I met at school. Um, like Alicia, Melody was pretty unpopular, like many, like my brothers. Melody was also biracial. At school, many boys liked her, but she took up for me when I was picked on. I also reconnected with her later in life and almost became her college roommate. I had to back out because of the expense of the school. So let me kind of fast forward there. Melody um, I met her again at the school I attended with the new placement. So I kind of got ahead of myself there. Melody was at the school in my new placement. Okay. But still, basically, she took up for me and just was basically like a stand in. Like, she was really cool, a really, really cool person. She would like stand toe to toe with people. And we need more of that. All right. So, uh, yeah, let me put a pin in that. So if you have a youth, that, or maybe a child in your home or whatever, and really talk to them about the importance of not being the bully. I don't know if that's a conversation that's kind of talked about. I know in some communities, and a lot of times the underserved community, kids are kind of taught to like fight back and don't let nobody punk you. And I know that's the thing. But I think more parents or grandparents or guardians or mentors need to conversate or talk with the youth and let them know that it's okay not to be the bully. They don't have to fight everyone. They don't have to get them before you get, and unfortunately, a lot of these schools, the environment is not always good. But in other words, I encourage them to be the leader more than the follower. That's what I'm trying to say. I feel like that will go a longer way despite anything. And I know the pressure is always to fit in. You got to fit in with what you wear and how you look. And it shouldn't really be that way. I feel like, despite that, children can still be individuals and leaders, but they just need the right guidance. And if you are a mentor, especially a teacher, if you are an inspiring foster parent or a guardian or whatever your position is, I feel you taking that time with those youth will go a longer way. I'm hoping it does. All right, let me continue because as you know, I could talk, right? All right. So from that experience, I knew she was okay. So basically, later in life, I was like so close with getting a room with, once again, life connections, right? I was so close to getting a room, becoming her roommate in college, in the college I was looking at or whatnot. And of course, I couldn't at last minute because of the school expense. Um, and so thank you for your patience. From that experience, I knew she was dating a guy, but that's about it. We lost contact, and when I saw her mom around town, her mom was so sweet. Town, I asked about her well-being, comparing myself to her and other girls at school. I always felt like the ugly duckling. I now know that my personality kind of carried me further than my looks could. Um, I know that now. But then that my dental issues were the only reason I had held back from being free around others, and that went well into my adulthood. Still getting, still tackling it today, but I have more of an insurance a growing assurance that, I'm uniquely made and different for a reason, and those minor things could be fixed. Okay, so my time with Miss Hanks was now winding down, and much like my stay at Miss May's home, I did not want to leave. I always say this, and I say this quite a few times, it, and maybe it's just me. I don't know if anybody's had this experience, but the respite homes tend to be the best homes. They tend to be the best placements. It's like the foster parents or the care providers are nicer, more engaging, and then I understand it could be a plus for them because they don't have to deal with stuff long term. I get it, but some of these people, like, man, they really should consider. I don't know. They would make phenomenal full term placements. I'm gonna just say that. Okay. All right. So like her home and many other respite homes, let's say it that way, I did not want to leave. Earlier I mentioned that the Hanks residence was a temporary placement. When the day of my transition arrived, I was reminded that I was just there for a season. Like my stay with Miss May, I knew this was a good home. What I took away from this home are a few key life lessons. I was shown another example of love from a mother figure. I learned about personal grooming from a sister figure. I learned about, um, yeah, and finally, I learned about peer pressure. So, King James, chapter 1, verses 2 to 3, may my brethren count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptation, knowing that the trying of your faith worketh patience. So, what that means is, we're going to go through stuff in life. A lot of it is uncontrolled circumstances and situations. But when we find ourselves in our journeys and our walks and our purposes and whatnot, we have to know that it's for a greater purpose than what we feel we're going through. And I can only attest from that truth, from experiencing it throughout my whole life and coming to the reality that it was for a greater purpose. Okay, so what I learned from Miss Hank is to take one step at a time. Something I have held on to, adopt it really to this day. I used to, be told, "Oh, you gotta look at the big picture," and I would say how I can't, you know, for me, if I look at the big picture, I may pull out my hair. But now I've learned to take one day at a time. Why? Because, you know, and no one knows. I know people say you got to plan, you got to do this, but for me, everybody's situation is different. But for me, I have learned taking one day at a time because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't even know what the next 5 minutes is going to bring, but I'm going to take my time to appreciate every breath and moment I have right now. So therefore, for me, I have to take one day at a time. Okay. So what I learned from Miss Hank was to take one day at a time. She served as a voice of reason and encouragement for creativity, which I have carried well into my adulthood. I never once heard Miss Hanks raise her voice or talk down to me. I see this a lot, especially when I was subbing in schools, K-5 schools, how the teachers would talk at the students or talk down to the students. I can't stress enough. If you are a mentor, a teacher, an advocate, if you're a parent, foster, adoptive, whatever you are, how really meeting the youth right where they are is vital. They remember it. I'm telling you what I know. I remember stuff from when I was 5 years old, and I'm just turned 39 on the 12th of January. You you may not realize, but kids, they remember stuff, and they will remember 9 times out of 10 they will remember the bad before they remember the good. So why not try to make as many good memories, even if they've come from a hardship background? You could be the change that they should see. You can be the exception in meeting them right where they are and helping them to have a brighter future. However, you can help in whatever capacity you can help. And I'm gonna just say that I feel that that's possible, but by taking one step, one day, and one moment at a time. All right. All right. So I never once, like I said, heard Miss Hank raise her voice or talk down to me. This was the first foster home where I had the opportunity to cook in the kitchen, and that's kind of stirred my love for food now, right? Um, and the freedom to meet peers. I enjoyed the fact that the church was so welcoming. I was disappointed that this was just a brief stop. I wanted to stay longer, of course, like I said, but it wasn't my choice to be made. What I can now appreciate is how Miss Hank was patient and recognized my efforts. Unlike Miss Angus, my improved grades were applauded, and I never had to compete for her affection. That's the worst thing. Whether you are not a foster, adopted, orphan, or underserved child, or even if you're at home and you have both your parents, whatever your situation is, and that's the worst feeling like you have to compete for affection. No child, I don't care what their circumstances, no child should ever feel they have to compete for affection. No child. In other words, I hear so many people say, "Oh, my sister was the favorite, my brother was the favorite, all of y'all should be the favorite." It should not be a clear distinction that, oh, well, my mom likes my brother more, or my mom likes my baby sister more. That's awful. But I've heard that over the years so many times. I hope that's not somebody's situation right now. I mean, that's at least watching this. And if it is, maybe you could be the change in that, because kids know. Kids know. They know. Ugh, okay, I can go on, right? So, all right. So sadly, this would be the reality I faced entering my new home. I had to compete for affection. Okay. So I did reconnect with Miss Hanks again in high school, and I will share more in my final placement. But unfortunately, as an adult, I tried to visit her where we lived. When I knocked on the door, the resident didn't know who she was, or where she was, or what had become of her. Despite this reality, I'm grateful for the impact she had on my life. I now basically know much of her influence assisted in providing me with some life skills I can appreciate, and I would say a lot more life skills I can appreciate. She taught me so much, and also, I know she was a teacher, but it's a blessing, like you know reuniting with her in high school. That was a blessing. Okay. So at that time, I didn't know I also had teacher qualities. It's funny because uh, leaving our home, I was often asked if I was a teacher. I also appreciate the protection of my sister figure and grooming tips from Felicity. And Alicia had the confidence and popularity I often saw in school, while Malik and Clayton showed me how to be more careful not to get caught up. The temptation I faced in peer pressure didn't compare, however, to what I was about to face. Once again, it's one thing to learn about sex education on tapes. Also, it's another to learn about life skills from your family. The question remains, however, how do you face peer pressure or temptation? Now I want to ask, aside from how do you face peer pressure or temptation, how do you face peer pressure or temptation, not temptation that you want to put yourself in, but an unexpected temptation, meaning even if someone you trust turns into an unexpected predator. So what am I asking? How do you deal with that? I'm gonna leave that there because that's the end of chapter 4, and that was the reading of chapters 3 and 4 of Foster. I really hope you enjoyed reading along with me today if you were able to, or listening along if you were able to. And of course, this is going to be on replay. And so, yeah, so today we covered I Could Have Died. And meaning number one, this content is going to be posted on all 3 platforms: the author Shalina Michelle Tate page, on the current Foster My Story Plus page, and also on the Foster My Story author YouTube page as well. And feel free to share this with somebody they go watch it at their convenience or listen to it at their convenience. And it was kind of long because I'm covering 2 chapters. And so I appreciate you, anybody who's able to really listen in. I'm hoping that despite what I've shared and expounded on, that you really see that I really do care. Like everybody's situation is different. Everybody has different circumstances and have, met different types of adversities. And basically the lessons I've gained from each situation was, that was part of life. And each individual that I've met along the way, despite the circumstance, situation, or scenario, will always be a lasting bond. And that I could still take away something positive despite maybe it, even if it was a disconnect, or even if it was like a don't text me again. It's nothing but love. That's what I'm trying to say. Nothing but heart to just like say you were a part of my journey. And I'm hoping that you can continue your journey with me in Fostered chapters 5 and 6 next week, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, I understand people are busy on a Saturday, and so feel free to catch this replay content. It's going to be posted on all 3 platforms. And like I said, next week I'll be getting into hands-on kind of person and standing alone. And then finally, last week of January, I'll be covering chapter 7 and 8. What was I thinking? And the unexpected milestone. And so super excited because I do have new content in the works. I am rebooting Fostered with a new cover and some additional content that's going to be paired with Fostered. Also, I'm going to be finally coming out with those sequels, right? And they're going to have paired content with them as well. And I'm also working on some other projects, some short films, some other writings, and I'm super excited for the progression of each of those projects in time. Once again, as I've learned over the years, stuff takes timing, the right connections, the right timing. So thank you for joining me today on the 2-chapter read of Fostered. Super excited for next week. Hands-on kind of person and standing alone. Feel free as well to get your Kindle copy on Amazon.com, and you can follow along with me. Like I said, this is being rebooted with some fresh content, and I can't wait to reveal this to you as time permits. But thank you for taking time out of your Saturday, or go back and watch the full replay as time permits. I know it's kind of long, but you are much appreciated. So like I say all the time on my podcast, being fostered, adopted, orphaned, or underserved simply means you're gracefully chosen. And I'm sharing my fostered book because, despite your circumstance and situation, or where you've come from, or what you've ever gone through, you have purpose. It doesn't matter if you grew up in foster care, or you were adopted, or your parents divorced, or or you are an extended family, or you never knew your parents, or whatever your situation. That's what I'm trying to say. If you were raised by your grandma, or you was in an orphanage, or you was adopted and you just discovered you were adopted, whatever your circumstance, don't beat yourself up. Why? Because as youth, as kids, we can't control our situations. We can't even control the fact that we were born. And I want to encourage you to just hopefully take time to heal from all those negative remarks and sayings that somebody poured into your life. Somebody may have told you, like, I wish you were never born. Well, those are harsh words, but those words weren't theirs to give to you. You were born for a purpose. You were born for a reason. You have a testimony, whether it's through writing, like I'm writing, whether it's through making movies or plays, whether it's through dancing, whether it's through teaching, whether it's just being uniquely and wonderfully made. And each person does not matter. Your circumstance, situation, your past, it does not matter. You have purpose. I'm going to keep saying that. You have purpose. And I'm hoping that, you're listening to this content. I know there's some stuff I've probably said that's like, but I want you to know, despite whatever I've shared, or that you may not agree with, or you may have questions about, know that you have purpose, and know that you have a story, and know that your story is part of your healing, part of your testimony, and it's there to not only help you, but to help the next generation, or help somebody that's right there across the street from you, downtown from you, in school with you, in another country from you. Whatever your situation and circumstance, is there for a purpose. All right, I could go on as I do, right? But I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. I appreciate you just taking time with me hey, if you don't want to leave a comment here, feel free to inbox me privately about your questions and concerns. I'll be more than happy to try to answer them the best way I can. And I'm hoping you're able to join me next Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, on the platforms of Foster My Story Plus Facebook page, author Charlene Michelle Tate Facebook page, and the Foster My Story author page, YouTube page, and just participate, And I'm hoping real soon, as time permits, to come with some fresh content. All right. So there you have it. I appreciate y'all. Let me stop sharing. And I thank y'all for taking time with me today on Saturday. I'm looking forward to next week. We're almost done. Can you believe it? Almost done with the book. It's only 8 chapters, so that's why I'm doing 2 chapters a week. But I appreciate your patience in allowing me to expound on that journey I went through, and I'm excited to share the other content that has allowed me to become entangled, and then eventually developed, and then eventually helping others tell their stories as well. All right. Have a dynamic rest of your weekend and your holiday coming up. What, Monday, I think. Have a dynamic rest of your week. Take care.